Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a post-snowy weekend in New York. I got to tell you folks, this year I am so over winter. I am ready. And if it weren't for that harmattan, I would not be here, I trust, just so you all know. So I'm looking for my next location or destination that will help me to escape both winter and the dust. So give us some feedback on some suggestions because I would love it. And so in other news, yesterday was the MLK holiday and the inauguration of the 47th president of the United States. And it's just a really interesting time to reflect on how we as people are people and coping with being people. And so I feel like my guest this week is a great voice on guidance and in all things in coping and being who we want to be and discovering who we are. And so I will get on with her bio. She is an active and vocal plant medicine advocate and a psychedelic guide specializing in psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and ayahuasca. Advising on intentions and integration, she helps her clients get the most out of the psychedelic experience by teaching them other supporting healing modalities that further healing and growth. She has spoken at the UK's largest psychedelic conference, Breaking Convention, where she is also on the management board. She's also spoken at Oxford University, University College London, UCL, Drug Science, Psychedelic Society UK, and many other events and podcasts. She is the founder of African Spiritual Practices events and retreats. Akua Ofosuhene, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited and very happy to be on the podcast with you today.
And I'm happy to see you're in the great sunlight of Accra. It's like bright.
Yes.
I miss it. I'll be there soon.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
So I'm Ghanaian British in that I was born in the UK, but I'm Ghanaian heritage and Ghanaian in my soul. So I'm that way round. And now I'm back in Ghana, semi-permanent, really. I think this year of 2025, so far, I only have a 4-week trip planned to the UK. So I'm pretty much based in Ghana and very happy to be here. So what was the other part of your question? Did you say, what's my practice?
What is your craft?
What is my craft? Wow, I love that. So when I first met you, I was making bags and I was also at that time trying to produce an animation film. And now I've kind of left fashion behind, very, very, very recently left fashion behind. And I'm really working full time with the medicine, organizing retreats, seeing clients one-on-one or in groups and speaking at conferences and events. And yeah, my artistic practice seems to have really taken a bit of a backseat, but I can feel that I will go back to the fabric, but definitely not in terms of fashion. I've got some ideas to start making some art just for myself, really. But my craft as it is really understanding ayahuasca, especially more, and working with her to work with my clients and learning more about trauma and all the other ways in which we can release and let go of trauma and our stories.
So I definitely want to understand how you came to that craft as your place now. But let's understand a little bit more about how you started the evolution and where fashion and textiles and things first entered your world, because I'm looking at your beautiful necklace and I just remember you know, that is something going into the workshop. So background folks, I think I saw, we met out somewhere and I saw your bags and I was like, oh my gosh, I need those bags.
Yeah.
So that was at the same time I also was doing my children's clothing line. And so I branded them and sold those and people loved them. And so that was the first bag that we had in the series. I had other ones after. And then also we crossed with one of my co-production partners in the animation space. And so you were working on a Akue story, I believe.
No, it was
what you were. A Confinoche.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Confinoche story. So tell us about how you were, so you were creative. So, and I asked you that because, as a traditional, we know our traditions,
Yes,
and being creative is not necessarily always celebrated. So
yes.
how did you find yourself being that creative freely?
So I grew up, my mum was a dressmaker. So I grew up learning to sew. So I actually don't remember a time of not being able to sew. I remember being very small and sitting at my mum's feet while she was at the industrial machine. And in the
Mhm.
70s, there was a fashion for having this plaited denim on jeans. And I remember my mum
Mm.
teaching me how to plait because she was making jeans with the plaits on them. And that was the first time I got involved in her sewing. And it became my thing. And so from then, I actually remember making clothes for dolls, carried on like that. And the reason why I started actually sewing was because I wanted to have a job because my parents didn't give us pocket money and my white friends got pocket money. And I remember my dad saying, well, you're going to have to get a job. And everything I tried to do around the house, my parents were like, we're not going to pay you for washing up. We're not going to pay you for sweeping. They were like,
Mhm.
no, you have to get a job outside of the home and come back and sweep.
Yeah.
So, but then they wouldn't let me get a job anywhere where my boss could be a man. So, yeah,
Oh.
or anywhere there was a man. So
Oh my God.
exactly. So I just started then sewing for my friends because the whole thing was to
Uh-huh.
make money. And then eventually ended up having a stall in London's Camden Lock Market. And that was
Mm.
my whole thing into sewing. So that lasted pretty much most of my life, but I would dip in and out because I was also interested in filmmaking, got to make I think 2 documentaries for Al Jazeera. And then when I was looking to raise money for the Anochi project, which originally had been a documentary, and I shot everything, which one day I will make the time to edit because it's now been over 10 years since I shot the documentary. But the whole idea kind of met this producer. He was like, oh my God, this should be an animation. And then I think I spent about 6 years trying to raise money for the animation. So at the time that I met you, all of that had been going on. And I think I was just coming out of a co-production deal that I was trying to do with a South African company. And I was getting more and more disillusioned because I think the last thing after 2 years of trying to do this deal with this company where I was spending my money to make the beginning part, the pre-production of the animation, having all these animators in my house who I was paying, and this South African company were going to come in with the lion's share of the money. They found an amazing South African director who had international reputation. He said, I want to do this animation. But then they were like, can the characters be animals?
Hey.
And I was just kind of like, there is no way the most important
Right.
person in
Wow.
Asante Ghanaian history can now be what? A Konfanachi is going to be a lion and El Tutu is going to be a
Right.
monkey or something. So
Yeah.
it was like a no-no. And then he sent me some stills from a film that he'd done that had been, I think was being distributed by Disney. And that
Mm.
they were like robotized Africans
Mm.
almost. And so he was like, can we do something like this, but based more on masks? And I was just kind of like, I've paid these guys, I've borrowed a lot of money and I've spent a lot of my
Mm.
own money. About £50,000 had actually gone into the production at that stage. And and these guys had all been living in my house drawing for nearly 3 years. And
Oh, wow.
it was just kind of like, I can't change. I can change the artwork within a certain parameter, but not outside of humans. The story is too
Mhm.
important for
Mhm.
me and my people. And if it cannot be, if you're saying that the world is not ready for human Africans in a cartoon, even though one of the world's biggest animated films was Africans, which was Kirikou. Very few
Hmm.
animations have made as much money as Kirikou. And yet I went to Cannes and everything with the film, and, you know, they were all acting like they were doing me such a massive favor to even see me, because the world cannot bear to see Africans on the screen, was very much the kind of attitude. And by the end, I just became very, very disillusioned. And I was going to do a co-production with Ghanaian artists who in the end seemed to really suffer a massive head rush of how important they also were. And I just realized that for me, the entertainment industry just has an egregore that just doesn't sit well with me. It just seems people just want, and forget the project. And so in the end, I just put a line through the project. And that was kind of my foray. And by then I'd stopped doing documentaries as well, because I was also very disillusioned by the kind of stories that big companies wanted from Africa. You know, if I was willing to make a documentary about women being cast out of their villages for being witches, there was money. If I wanted to make documentaries about female mutilation, there was money. You know, it was kids down a mine, there was money. Yeah. So I just completely walked away from all forms of entertainment, even stopped watching films for a really long time.
Mm.
I still don't even watch that much films, actually. I watch a lot of crap TV instead. But yeah, it was very strange. But now, in the fullness of time, I think it was all part of actually just letting go of something to be where I am now. And now the whole obsession with
Hmm.
the Companoche and our spirituality all completely makes sense. Now I understand why I went down that road. And I think for myself, it was never really to make a film. I think I needed to know
Mm.
about Companoche and our spirituality for what I'm doing now. So I still hope that one day I might find the right person to just hand over all the scripts, all the artwork, and someone else can run with the story. And that would be
Hmm.
fine. But yeah, that all of that was brilliant because it helped me just close the door and enter this new paradigm.
Interesting. So I like how you've kind of seamed together the story to know, everything happens for a reason and there's purpose, right? And so I want to take a step back and understand a little bit more about your London, because you talked about, when you were growing up and you were selling at Camden Market.
Yeah.
And so where was your local in London? And then that's kind of in the context of now why the where. How did you come to be living, working, and playing now being primarily based in Accra?
Yeah, yeah. So our family, like a lot of Ghanaians, my mother and father were very enamored by Kwame Nkrumah and just the hope for Ghana, the newly independent Ghana. Both my parents were from villages in Asante, Kumasi, Mampong, and my mum, Jetiase. And they were the first generation, both sides, the first generation to enter into Western schooling, church schools. They were the first generation in our family to go to Christian church because both sides were very heavily involved in their particular royal family, traditional Asante. So after the Yasantua War, although we didn't give up the Golden Store, we lost, and Asante became fully part of Gold Coast. They were a generation who they didn't know about the Yasantua War, but they were the first ones into school, into education. Kwame Nkrumah has given us independence. We're going to make the new Ghana. So education was what brought them to the UK 1966 for my mum and my dad a little bit earlier. And they had a 10-year plan. So they came back to Ghana 1979, 10 years later, still, I think, very excited by Ghana. But then Jerry Rawlings did his coup, and that really took Ghana very far back. I think a lot of people forget actually how much violence was there with Rawlings' coup. there was actually starvation and famine in Ghana. They used to call this thing Rawlins chain. People had so much bones here. You were called that you were wearing Rawlins chain. I myself, even though I got out very early on, I was 9 years old and we had had, I don't know how many months of very little food that we'd had, even though my dad was quite high up in business in Ghana and was able to get petrol, I don't know how, to drive to the village to get food and bring food back. We still had to move from everybody having their own plates, eating in the dining room, to one big bowl, eating in the kitchen. And I was such a slow eater at 9 years old. I actually ended up about 4 stone in weight, and I was already at that stage, my mum was telling me I was already nearly 5 foot tall. And that's when they decided to bring, I think my little brother had already been brought to England. But when I got so small and then I hurt my leg, that's when they brought me to England as well. And, arriving in England was no like, wow, because I arrived to Margaret Thatcher's Britain.
Right.
Rising unemployment. We were just going into the Falklands War. The UK had just come out of this whole 3-day week where essential services had been on strike. The streets apparently had been filled with rubbish. So things were not, I got to Britain and it was a scary place, the UK. And we've gone from Ghana being kind of like upper middle class to the UK, the UK being in social housing, living on the third floor, prostitutes below me and an alcoholic family above us and us sandwiched in the middle. So growing up in the UK at that time in the 80s, and in America, you guys had Reagan, and together you had a lot of deregulation of financial instruments and stuff. You had yuppieism growing. We started to have a massive unemployment problem in the UK. Lots of houses, the economy started doing weird things. Lots of people lost their homes in the 80s in the UK. So
it's
it was
a huge recession,
weird. Yeah, it was weird. And this was my burgeoning into the world. And so when I was growing up in the UK at that time, I just felt like the whole world was burning because it felt like Ghana was burning and we had to and we come to the UK and the UK seems to be burning, sinking. And there was some kind of war happening at the time. I can't even remember which war, but there was also the threat in the early 80s. There was the threat of maybe Russia and America might go to war until Gorbachev came along and then it seemed like, the world was changing. So for me, I would say really from 9 to 16, I was really very confused about the world and it pushed me into, okay, I need to try and make money, but I need to sort out my spirituality. I became a Buddhist for a long time as a way to try and find something to hold on to. So my local was London and kind of like the centre of London because I was just down the road from Camden, down the road from Carnaby Street. So at the same time, there was a kind of the world's ending, but there's this punk energy coming through. But for me, where I grew up in King's Cross, punk was very white. I was not invited to that scene, even though I admired the energy of it from afar, but it didn't include people like me until I discovered Camden Lock Market, where suddenly at 14, I had my first stall. I was making sort of traditional Chinese dresses out of African print and like Chinese silks and Indian saris. They were quite innovative when I think about it now. And I was doing a lot of kimonos also, but out of African print and mixing silks and stuff. So Camden was like my first home where I felt like
Yeah.
in this place where there's such a marriage of cultures and classes, I find a home where I can fit in and be a little bit weird at the same time. So yeah, Camden, Carnaby Street, that was like my first, I can relax. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so fast forward now, why the where? How did you now find yourself back in Accra?
Yeah. So I'd always wanted to be able to move back to Ghana. So once I started sewing as an adult and I started trading at music festivals where I would be selling my wares, I straight away started coming to Ghana and I would buy arts and crafts. And I would also sell that
Mm.
with my wares, traveling around the country, traveling around Europe. And so this thing of I want to be able to live definitely in Ghana, especially if I have children. That was like my biggest thing. And I remember when I got pregnant, my sister and I went for the scan. And as soon as they said it was a boy, both of us, the feeling was, oh my God, if it's a boy, like now we know it's a boy, there's decisions to be made. And for me, I did not want to bring up my son in the UK. I really saw how the UK broke down Black boys and Black men. And I just didn't want that for my son. And so we were lucky and we were able to move back to Ghana when my son was 8. And he'd lost his
Mm.
father. His father had actually been living in Abu Dhabi and he died over there. But we were moving to Ghana when he died. So we just carried on our move, stayed in Ghana. And then my mum got sick after 5 years of us being in Ghana. So we went back to the UK to look after my mum. We fought for 3 months and then that ended up staying, and 8 years I
Oh,
ended up
wow. Okay.
back in the
Yeah.
UK. Yeah, very long time. It so hadn't have been the plan at all because I loved my life in Ghana.
Mm.
I absolutely, even through Ebola,
Mm.
which
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
affected stuff in Ghana and made Ghana really hard. I still did not think that I would, end up back in the UK. But these are the things of life. You just never know. And yeah, it was definitely a bittersweet 8 years in the UK. So I'm pleased to be back in Ghana.
Okay. Okay. And it's kind of a bit of this kind of reinvention that is bringing you back to live
Yes.
this new self. So
Yeah.
you've decided to relocate and you're back in Ghana. Now, I keep saying Accra, but are you in Accra? Are you in Kumasi? Where have you settled back?
I'm yeah, so I've settled back in both
Okay.
really.
Hmm.
So right at this moment I'm in Accra, but we have our family home in Kumasi. And I was just telling my friend that I don't want to end up being permanently in Accra
Mm.
again.
Hmm.
I really, really, really want to homify the home in Kumasi
Okay.
and really just have that thing of being able to be in both places and travel around the country. But my real thing is to make Kumasi my base space.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, which is kind of nice. Kumasi has definitely grown and become a different place in the last 10 years, so I can see that. So, the way of, you kind of mentioned the bittersweet 8 years, but I think that had a lot of contributing force in who you are now and how you've
Yeah.
kind of discovered this new craft. So tell us about that journey of the moving from the fashion and the textiles to becoming a plant healer.
Yeah. So when we went back to the UK to look after my mum, I had actually done tons and tons of research because she was going to have back
Mm.
surgery. And I found out that she didn't need back surgery. There was other things that she could
Mm.
do, but they were all like
Mhm.
natural. And at that time, I didn't really have the language to be able to persuade her, but I was sharing information with her and my siblings to try and get everyone on board to see that this operation would not be good for my mum, not with the advanced problems that she had with her spine. Anyway, I wasn't able to persuade her. She decided to go for the operation. I came to look after her for 3 months. The operation went wrong. A lot worse than I thought through my research. But once it went wrong, the more research I did, the more I understood exactly why it had gone wrong. And while I was there looking after my mum, I feel that before I left to go back to England, my siblings, I remember them saying, "Oh, don't worry, when you come, we'll help. We know you're leaving your life in Ghana, but we will really, really help." Anyway, when I got to England, my perception is everyone was looking at me like, what help do you need? What? You need help? Like, get a job. And it felt really like, hang on, you people are leaving me out in these streets of looking after mum, and no one's even coming by and saying, "Wow, we know what you're doing. Here's £100. Look, the rest of the siblings, we've just thought actually we should give you something because you are mum's main care and you do actually have a child as well." Like, it just felt like I was abandoned by my siblings. And I went into a depression, but I don't think I even knew I was depressed. And I didn't notice that my son was unhappy. I found like the best school we thought we could find in our area. It was a brand new school. It was related to UCL, the university. And I thought, brilliant, this will be his access to, two of the best universities in the world. So I was like, he's good, because in Ghana, he was like, this boy never did not have a book. His head was in a book. He knew all about all the mythologies of the world. He knew about philosophy. I mean, this kid, you could sit him with a bunch of adults and he would be fine. Better with adults than he was with children. So I just did not notice that he also was not doing well. And I think when I noticed, I think I actually didn't notice until one day the police knocked on our door and they were like, "We have your son in custody. He has been found with a knife." And his friend had thrown away a bag. And when we found the bag, that had marijuana wrapped to sell. And I was so shocked. I think I even laughed and went down to the police station. And when I got there, my son's demeanor, like I was so, I think only another parent who's been through this will really understand. Like, he was like a different person. When the doors first opened for us to go into the interview room, he looked like a scared child. When we sat down, this whole other persona came through him, where he was slouching in his chair. He was mumbling his answers. I wanted to punch him the way he was behaving. He was just, for me, he was acting like this street kid with no upbringing, with no knowledge of how you use your grammar. I mean, it was on so many levels. I was looking at him like, who the fuck are you right now with this behavior, acting as if this is who you are, out there selling drugs? Like, I was flabbergasted. At that moment, I thought, this is the worst moment of my life. Later, I realized this was not the worst moment of my life at all. It was going to get worse and it was going to be worse. And for a little while, he was good. I took him to a psychotherapist. He was having this therapy called EMDR, rapid eye movement therapy, and that was helping his concentration. And because he'd never been in trouble before, if he was really good leading up to the case going to court, then he could get a caution. And I thought, right, I'm going to use this opportunity to do everything I can to help him to be really good. But I had started to realize that I also needed to change. I think that's what brought lots of things into sharp focus for me. So at that time, while he was going through that, I started learning tapping. a form of tapping called faster EFT or
Mm-hmm.
Eutactics, started by this American guy, and it changes things
Mm-hmm.
fast. So I started doing tapping, and that was really, really helping me. I started seeing a lot more stuff about alternative therapies that really helps the mind. So I was learning stuff and then sharing it with my son, which is how I learned about rapid eye movement therapy. So and as any time I could afford it, he would get a session, and it seemed to be working, especially seeing the therapist. But later what I realized is that my son is such a good speaker. The therapist wasn't understanding really what was going on. Later, after I had to educate myself, I started to understand that actually my son was more like someone in a cult, and he'd been groomed at school into this drug dealing. So where the therapist I was taking him to all sorts of organizations, they were all kind of like, well, this can happen. He's looking for a replacement family. He's lost his father. You're a single mother bringing him up. He needs to see more positive role models. And all the time, I thought I was being defensive because I would say, look, there's nobody in our family in prison. There's nobody in our family dealing drugs. So this whole thing of he needs positive role models, or he has a positive role models. There are lots of men in his life. His father is dead, yes, but he has other men in his life. His father's brothers, one of them is a policeman. The other one is a headmaster of a school. His grandfather was an RAF pilot. He's with my mum a lot of the time. My brothers are all responsible people, but it felt like, okay, calm down, Akua. You're being defensive because you think everyone's blaming you, whatever. And I would take him to all of these things. I was happy to take all the help.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we were doing it, the more it was also helping me to realize you need to become the new parent for the new child you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was trying the normal things. I was trying kind of like to have boundaries. Everyone's always talking about boundaries. I was trying to have boundaries. You're not allowed to do this. You can do that. He was walking over all of them. Punishments didn't mean anything to him. There was a time where there was almost nothing left in his room but the bed, took away the games, the phone, and then later found a little burner phone hidden under the bed. He was not listening to us. And then I started to learn through Gabor Mate, I learned about peer attachment. And I realized that my son was now attached to his peers and no longer attached to us.
Yeah.
And that book, the book was called Hold On to Your Kids, really helped me to see what was going on, that my the threats from the family, the show of love from the men in the family and all these other people were not working because we were no longer important to him. He was no longer attached
Mm-hmm.
to us. He was attached to the people he was going out selling drugs for. And so what they thought was what was important to
Sure.
him, not what we thought and what we said was what was important to him. And in all of that, that's when I started to learn about psychedelics, because I started Googling how to change your mind fast, how to change the brain fast, how to change perception fast. I could see he was getting further and further in to this thing. So everything for me was about speed. And as soon as I started looking up stuff to do with neuroplasticity and the brain, that's when I started learning about psychedelics. And as soon as I started understanding how psychedelics work, I realized it could help me and my son. So I started first with Iboga, which is from Gabon, and they synthesized the ibogaine now to help people with addiction problems. And I always say Iboga was brilliant for me because it gave me a new spine. I always say it made me a dragon mother. I became so much more confident. Yeah, I was chasing cars because cars would come and drop him off at night. I would be taking down their license plate numbers. I started being a lot more friendly to the police who were involved in everything, because he started then going missing, and he'd go away 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. And the social worker became like a really good friend of mine. So I was getting good information that they weren't supposed to be telling parents, but
Mm-hmm.
she would tell me. And the police were really, really helping me. So the psychedelics really helped me to, I suppose, deal with my own traumas growing up, but also really be present with what was happening inside of my family. And it helped me to start to really hatch a plan of how to get my son back. And I started to understand that it was like he was in a cult. So I found an amazing book by a woman called Diane Benscoter. And I think the book might be called something like In the Footsteps of a father, something like that. And she talked about how she was recruited into a cult, how she came out of the cult, and how she worked to get other people out of cults. And she had a really good kind of framework of how to get a loved one out of the cult. So that's what I started following. And so it was no more rules, no more kind of, if you do this, this will happen. Like all of that stopped. And I had to start empathizing and accepting where he was so that he would feel comfortable enough for the times when he would want to get out, he would tell me. And this was one of the things that Diane Benscoter talks about, is that people in cults actually want to leave almost every day. And then they
Right.
re-persuade themselves
Right.
to stay. And the shame keeps them there. And so family members need to just be there for those moments where there is a chink in the armor, then you're there to help extract them. Yeah. So that's what I was doing with my son. And eventually I started passing on information to him about the different scientific trials that were going on into psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and MDMA for PTSD. And MDMA, he kind of wasn't so into, because later I learned it was something they were selling as well. So while he was involved in that, he actually was kind of anti-drugs himself as something he should take. But he was out there selling with his friends. And eventually, because I was also then getting more and more into my African spirituality, I would also tell him things that I was doing. I was telling him that I'm pouring libation at the crossroads. I'm leaving coins for a legba. I'm praying for your safe return, not through the police, but through you changing and your higher self. He knew I was in touch with a good friend of mine who's a medium, who also is able to do, when they can take their mind into other spaces to see what's going on.
Kind of astral, but not
I can't
astral?
remember what it's called, but
Not astral. Oh,
yeah, not
okay. It's
astral.
more like a projection.
Yeah, but it's
Interesting.
very sim. Yeah, there was a whole kind of science around it for a long time, but she can sit here. So like one time, the first time my
Oh,
son ran,
remote viewing. Remote viewing. Is it remote viewing?
remote viewing, that's it.
Yeah.
Yes. So the first time my son ran away, I contacted her and I said to her, I need you to find him, tell me if he's safe and all this stuff. And she was able to locate him. She couldn't tell exactly where he was, but she said he's not far away. He is close to home. But she was like, there's a lot of smoke around. I think he's stoned. And she said, there's a bad presence. There's an adult there. He seems to be in charge. But I've spoken to his higher self. He will come home, but he will be looking drugged. So just to warn you how it's going to be. And the interesting thing that I learned with people who can remote view is they can also go back in time and forward in time, some of them. So she was able to go forward in time to see how he would be when he came home. And she was able to negotiate all of this with his higher self. So I knew he was going to come home. And he came home. He looked like someone who was strung out on heroin. I couldn't believe the state he was in. He was barely able to speak and he stank. I was so worried, but I was assured by her that he'd just been smoking. And she said he thinks he's just smoked skunk, but there was other things in what he'd been smoking. So she was able to give me all this information. And so I think once I had that information from her, all the spiritual stuff that I was doing, because I was also in touch with a hoodoo priest from America who lived in South Africa. So he was really helping me as well with also extra information. So over that time, I felt very solid in what was going on and the things that were helping me, the psychedelics, the African spiritual stuff, the medium in the UK and Baba Siete in South Africa. I felt like I had a real ring fencing, and the police and the social workers. It was like in the 3D world and on the astral planes, there were people who were helping us to bring us together. So when I suggested to my son that he should come home to take psychedelics, it was at a time when Baba Siete said, this is the window of time to finally ask him that question. I checked it out with Maggie. She was like, his higher self is ready for this. And I felt that our relationship was as solid as it could be while dealing with your child who's out there selling drugs. So I said to him, if you come home and you take this medicine, I promise you will be the best drug dealer you can be, or you'll give up and you'll be comfortable with giving up. And he agreed to come home, and things transpired where they thought there was going to be a raid at the house that they were hauled up selling drugs. So he came home early because I was expecting him to come home in the week, but he came home early. And so the first medicine I gave him was MDMA, because that gives you a universal empathy for yourself and also for everybody else around you. And then you are so full of love that you're able to tell the truth. So for a long time, people thought maybe MDMA could be a truth serum, but people are willing to tell the truth to people they love. It's not going to just make you tell the truth. So he told me a lot of stuff to do with how he was groomed and everything. And he told me he had some drugs, and he was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not what I want to do. So the next day we took the drugs, gave it back to the people. And then that night he had 5 grams.
Oh, wow. So it was one day.
Yeah, one day, one sitting. And then he had, the next day was when he had the magic mushrooms, 5 grams. And it seemed to put him in touch with a lot of grief. And he cried and cried and cried and cried. And then we were on a regime of him taking the psilocybin magic mushrooms on a cycle of 6 weeks or 2 months, longest 3 months. Very luckily, it coincided with COVID. So because of lockdown, he kind of couldn't go out. So it was brilliant. We had a really long time of working with the medicines. And then he himself decided to go to Ghana as soon as the borders were open. So he came back to Ghana, carried on working with the psilocybin, went to school and everything. But there was always still a part of him to do with this story of crime and selling drugs. And over time, he started to work less and less and less with the medicines. And I was very worried about that because because at the same time I was working with more and more people with the medicines. It had now become everything that I'd learned with myself, how to let go of trauma, how to bring intentions to the medicine, how to interrogate your intentions after you take the medicine to come up with a list of things to do. Because what I realized was you can take the medicine, have an amazing time, drop all of these things, and then over time, your problems can start to come back. And what I realized was because I wasn't doing the homework that had come with the initial healing. So it was like I was learning all these things for myself. And then I was packaging that, I suppose, to people who were coming to me to use psychedelics. So over the years, I was learning more and more and more, almost like about how the medicines want to work with us, as well as how we want to work with the medicines. And so when my son started to not want to work with the medicines, it worried me that every time I would go to any of the healers or diviners that I knew, everyone was, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And and I'm still kind of in that part of my journey with him. It's still, so he stayed here for 3 years, did some schooling, learned some trades, decided he wanted to go back to England. I was not satisfied that the transformation was complete because he hadn't been working with medicine for over a year and he didn't want to work with medicine. And the last thing he said to me about medicine was, I don't want to work with medicine because if I do, I won't do what I want to do. And it was like, yeah, this is like the biggest oxymoron. Like, what kind of a person does not want to do something that is for their ultimate good?
Yeah.
So, and some friends of his, I don't know, gave him the money because we weren't going to give him the money for a ticket back to the UK. He went back to the UK. He worked for about 4 months and then slowly he's gone back in. And now he doesn't want to talk to me about what he's doing, but all the divination just keeps saying to me, don't worry. So, and all the healings that I've had from different people over the last few years have been very interesting because if people meet me, they don't see me as a worrier. And if you ask me, I will tell you I don't worry about anything. And yet every time I have healing, it's taking away worry.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always taking away worry. So it's I'm in the situation with my son, but I'm also very much outside and watching it. And one of the big last heart-to-hearts that we had, I was just saying to him, I was saying to him my real truth. And I said to him, listen, whatever it is that you do, if you do this and this is how you die, no, I will take the medicine and I'll get over it because I must live my life. You know, I must live my life. I've been the dragon mother, but now you're a man.
Right.
And so you can do this thing and I will not let this thing you're doing crush me.
Yeah.
As much as it is in my power for me to do, I refuse to be that who is broken.
Thanks for joining us for part 1 of my conversation with Akua Ofosuhene. Please be sure to come back next week when we learn more about how her experience dealing with her son's trauma and resulting mental health challenges has brought her full circle into the world of healing. As always, you can catch us with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. You can leave up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and you can leave us a thumbs up on YouTube. We love your comments. Thank you. Please keep them coming. But reviews help others find good content on the internet. Until next time, bye for now.